Here are a few of our key observations. The first of these is that the 2024 elections are anticipated to be the most contested in the last 30 years, reflecting a very competitive environment. Secondly, that the election has been highly litigated, but we have noted and are pleased to state that the cases have been dispensed with expeditiously, and even though the outcomes were received with mixed feelings, they did not generate any disruptive reactions. Thirdly, there is significant public scrutiny regarding the transparency and fairness of the electoral process, and there are heightened expectations for accountability from all stakeholders. A number of issues, key issues that we think need for us to pay attention to. The first of these is the general security, potential protests, special monitoring of political party conduct and speeches. The next is voters who are unable to identify their voting stations due to the amendment of the Form 24 versus limited education. On this change to the election.
Let me take this opportunity to welcome all of us to Nairobi and Kenya. It is said that half the solution to a problem is identifying that there exists a problem. For a very long time, many people did not admit that there was something fundamentally wrong with the international financial architecture. In fact, initially, when voices were raised, they were dismissed. But I want to say today we are very proud, those of us, especially from this continent, who raised our voices, that today the conversation in the world is no longer whether we have a fit-for-purpose international financial architecture. Everybody admits that there is something fundamentally wrong with it. The issue in conversation now is where, how do we reform it? So the issue of reform is settled. It must be done. And I think it begins with, once we understand the problem, then it begins with where do we start? I think what we are saying is we need a financial architecture that has the following characteristics. Number one, long-term financing. 40 years, grace period, 10 years, or something in that order. Number two, low interest rates, concessional financing, including, where possible, grants. Number three, we also need financing at scale. The quantum is very important. And then number four, we also need financing that is agile, that is flexible, especially that responds, that is climate sensitive. So that if there are shocks, that financial architecture must be responsive, because climate change is the new normal. Switching from drought to floods progressively is becoming what it is. In Kenya, we had drought a year ago that decimated 2.5 million heads of livestock. This year, we're in floods that has taken the lives of 200 Kenyans. So this is the new reality. So the financial architecture that must be in place must respond to this climate reality that we have. And finally, is to be sensitive to sustainability. So our priority is to sort out the financial architecture, that's number one. Number two, our priority is to make sure that this continent, with its tremendous potential, we move it from potential to opportunity, from opportunity to investment. And finally, as I have said, even as we try to do something outside, we must also do something inside. That is why we are also looking at our own systems, our own governance, our own instruments. And that's why we are discussing, even internally, reform of the Africa Union, so that we are aligned as we reform the international financial architecture, as we reform the investment space to create opportunity for our assets. We must also reform our own institutions so that we align them and repurpose them to be in line with our aspirations and the outcomes we are looking for.
Thank you very much, President Ruto. In other words, reform is a two-way street. It's not just one way. But allow me to follow up very quickly. As we all know, Kenya and a number of other countries have been buffeted very devastatingly by extreme weather conditions, unpredictable weather conditions. And I think the projections for Kenya and other countries in the region are that over the next 7 years, we're still likely to see the same kind of weather patterns that we've seen this year. That being the case, and again, following a two-way reform process, what is it that African countries should be doing right now to mitigate the effects of climate change?
It is true that predictions are that Kenya and our region is going to have above normal rains for the next 7 years. That's a prediction. It is both positive and negative. And that is why, working with institutions like the Africa Development Bank, we are developing resilience instruments. It is the reason why we are having a conversation with the Africa Development Bank on our water infrastructure. How do we take care of this excess water? And how do we turn this excess water into an asset for making sure that we use it for our food security, we use it for the positive elements. So we must align our programs, our strategies with the reality of the moment and with the predicted reality of the future. So that is the alignment that we must do.
Thank you very much, President Ruto. I'm going to come to President Kagame next on a number of issues, particularly with regards to the global financial architecture, as well as the issue of reforms. Both yourself and President Ruto have been aligned. That being the case, what reforms do you really think should pave the way for giving Africa the resources that it needs to finance its own transformation and inclusive growth, even in the face of devastating climate change? What are the most critical reforms that you see and anticipate are needed?
Thank you. Let me quickly, first of all, and more importantly, thank our hosts, President Ruto, His Excellency, and also the President of the Africa Development Bank Group for inviting us here. Now, quickly to the point, we are talking about the architecture of, international financial architecture. Therefore, in mind, we have the architects. So what did the architect have in mind when they provided us with the architecture we have to deal with?
Here are a few of our key observations. The first of these is that the 2024 elections are anticipated to be the most contested in the last 30 years, reflecting a very competitive environment. Secondly, that the election has been highly litigated, but we have noted and are pleased to state that the cases have been dispensed with expeditiously, and even though the outcomes were received with mixed feelings, they did not generate any disruptive reactions. Thirdly, there is significant public scrutiny regarding the transparency and fairness of the electoral process, and there are heightened expectations for accountability from all stakeholders. A number of issues, key issues that we think need for us to pay attention to. The first of these is the general security, potential protests, special monitoring of political party conduct and speeches. The next is voters who are unable to identify their voting stations due to the amendment of the Form 24 versus limited education. On this change to the election